Hi, I'm Phil Hardwick, and today our guest is Dr. Marty Wiseman, who's the Executive Director of the Stennis Institute at Mississippi State. Dr. Wiseman, in your column coming up next week, you talked about community colleges in Mississippi, and you used the metaphor of them as being family members. And tell us a little bit about why you chose that metaphor and why you think the different sections, if you will, of the education budget in Mississippi are kind of like family members.
Well, as you recall, I mentioned that it's the time of year where the money's starting to get tight. A lot of the froth as far as legislation is getting out of the way, and we're starting to talk about money, and it's never a good picture. If you looked at headlines today, several school districts saying if they endure to cut the size that was being proposed, then they would either have to borrow money or raise taxes, and that is a normal annual refrain that we're confronted with. But basically what you're talking about is we've got three areas: K-12, community colleges, and universities, or IHL, that head for the trough to get their part of the state budget, and we're not skippy on that as far as money available. About 65% of the budget in Mississippi goes to education. So one certainly couldn't be critical of the legislature and the amount of money they appropriate. What's interesting to see is if you look at per capita expenditures and stop there, yeah, Mississippi comes in 46th, 7th, 8th, or 9th, or 50th, right down there where you usually look for Mississippi's name. If you look at it as a percentage of $1,000 in tax money available, we're in the top 10. Leading straight to the old blood out of a turnip analogy, we are doing just about as much as we can with the revenues, with the money available. Now, I concentrated on community colleges a little bit because most people are familiar with the arguments on K-12, and a lot of people are familiar with university funding, and they have fairly well-defined populations or student bodies. I think people are less familiar with the role of community colleges in a state like Mississippi. Nearly 3 million people, low 20s, 23% or so with bachelor's degrees. In the mid-40s, high school or less. After the age of 19, K-12 is no longer an option. And many who no longer can go to K-12 aren't eligible to go to the university. So it leaves hundreds of thousands of Mississippians as subjects of the community college open door policy. And certainly we are a state that has to concentrate on human capital development, and the only educational entity in the state that can provide that is community college.
And you mentioned the role of community colleges, of course, being education, but don't they have an expanded role in Mississippi? They're a bit unique from
the time was when we thought of them as a role in traditional education. You got out of high school, you weren't quite ready to go way off to the big university. You had the 2 years at junior college available to you, and I put an emphasis on junior because that simply implied that you were the little college. You were the half step between a high school and a university if you made it that far. And that role has expanded tremendously. And as it did so all across the country, this is not just a Mississippi phenomenon, the description changed from junior college to community college. And still, that was not meant to imply small or quaint as the word community might, but it implied a broad range of community education and literally human capital development on a localized basis, so to speak, a multi-county basis that community colleges were responsible for. And I think it's important as Mississippians look at the national discussion of the need. Someone's always bemoaning the fact that the United States is ranked 46th in science education, and just these astounding numbers. And you realize it's not going to be long before national policy is going to dictate a Sputnik-like drive to elevate education all across the country, and you come up short and say, well, where does that leave Mississippi? When you've got low 60% graduating from high school, meaning 30-something% was not, 600,000 or thereabouts living below the poverty line. You've got similar statistics for those who would be without health insurance if it wasn't Obamacare. So when you talk about human capital development, you're talking about the total person, and I don't necessarily like the term human capital, but when you say what can we do to add value to a human being such that they can step up to the pay window on Friday and get a check for a week's worth of work, and what will make that check bigger when they do, and everything points back to education. When it points to education in Mississippi, we've defined K-12, and that ends at 19, and then you've got those who are eligible that may go to a university, but the bulk of Mississippians fall in that middle ground. Now, one of the things I mentioned in the column was a strategy put together by community college presidents to request that they be funded at the midpoint, which is probably a very decent strategy. Let's say give us the middle between K-12 funding and university funding, and we'll make that work. But it perpetuates that notion that we are the guys in the middle, when really their agenda for community education and human capital development, they are set apart from the other two. And you ask about the family members, you always hear the middle child gets cheated. Well, you got the older child, the firstborn, and then you got the youngest who's often pampered and spoiled, and the middle child is the one that so I was alluding to that rather than being the middle child, that really doesn't apply to community colleges. And I went on to say there were the cousin with special needs, and those needs are special. And I think we are shortchanging community colleges by saying fund them at the midpoint because they're right in the middle. We give them the job of taking that high school graduate who does want to go to a community college first and then go on to a university, but maybe to be a doctor or an engineer. They take those as well as the 40-year-old 8th grade dropout single mom and maybe give her last chance to become a productive member of the workforce. And if you look at it, that is a very wide mission that we expect community colleges to shoulder.
Sure.
And I think the state of Mississippi, as we look at what it's going to take to broaden the tax base so that some of these other things will come a little bit easier to us, that group that would make minimum wage or less, if we can elevate those, I hesitate to say masses, but the numbers are large, so that they are taxpayers or bigger taxpayers without raising taxes, then the revenue pie gets bigger, and we all benefit by that investment.
Thank you, Dr. Marty Wiseman. And that's it for news and views from the Stennis Institute. Join us next week. I'm Phil Hardwick.